I gotta make a confession. It's probably you don't know this, but the genesis for this particular research was during Global Fusion. You had this presentation in Chicago, and it was right after it when I started thinking about it, and that was what, 2 years ago. So this is somehow something in the making. So thanks for planting that seed. A couple of thanks before I start, which these are. They're not just shout-outs. They're very sincere thanks. First to Dr. Downing, who's not only invited me for this presentation, but also has been a role model and a source of inspiration throughout my fourth year here. And thanks to Debbie at the Dean's Office and Laura at GMRC for their immense support while being away for 8 months. They were really taking care of lots of things for me here. Otherwise, research could not be done if you don't have people you can count on, and I got to do that. I got to say thanks when thanks is due. Sorry, I forgot my plumbing tools and my six-pack at home, but I got this presentation, which I really hope that we can engage in some meaningful conversation afterwards. I know the word meaningful conversation is being thrown a lot these days, but this is the kind of research that is triggered by some of the things that have been happening over the past, say, 15 to 20 years within the global media field, and particularly within the areas of cultural industries, specifically broadcasting. And it's not just related to the three cities that I mentioned here. It goes beyond those actual cities, because the changes were felt all across, and they were felt especially for people who are going into the media right now, knowing a little bit about the history and how things have evolved. Makes us sort of look more towards the future in so many ways, and knowing where we're coming from, we know where we're heading in terms of media, and so this is what triggered my original question for this research, is the amount of interconnectedness that's been going on, how global media has become such a highly business-oriented aspect of highly business-oriented in one aspect, and on the other aspect, how we're starting to depend on specific locations to produce media on our behalf, and we expect this to be coming from those particular locations. Without going any more, because you'll find out where I'm heading with this, and I look forward to your questions. So please, as you're going along, what I want you to do is just try to think about where we're going if this is the trend that's been happening within the media. To start off, I'm going to slightly map out the region of the world where I'm focusing. It's the part in the maroon. This is referred to as the Arab world. It is at the it starts off at the east in East Asia and goes all the way until the Atlantic City. Oh my God, that's Atlantic Ocean, and see. That's where I'm going this weekend, I hope. Anyway, so it spreads over 5 time zones, a total population of 360 million, 21 sovereign states, 21 countries that are there. And you've heard a lot about the Arab world and the Middle East, because it is also a hotbed of so many conflicts, because it just happens to be one of the areas where so many civilizations have started, and within these countries you have 30 ethnic groups. It's not just one grouping. And when we're saying the Arab world, because the only thing that sort of gathers all these countries together or links them together is the fact that they speak one language, which is Arabic. But even there, you have differences in terms of accents between people who live in that part, which is referred to as the Persian Gulf or the Gulf, this part, which is referred to as the Levant, and Northern Africa. So within this perspective, I'm trying to engage into questions about media and media revolution, because I'm sure many of you who are studying media have heard a lot about media revolution and the information superhighway and so many things that were thrown around over the past 15, 20 years. And this was not just there in the Arab world. It was all over the place. But in the Arab world in particular, the media scene in 1990, it looked pretty much like that. Especially when it comes to television, but also radio and print, it was mostly controlled by governments, and you rarely had more than 1 or 2 channels within each country. So each country, the television was terrestrial, limited to the borders of that particular country. Now, if we fast forward to 2008, the picture sort of explodes. Particularly, again, and my focus is going to be primarily on television, from 1 or 2 terrestrial channels per country, you're having access as one of these 360 million, you will be having access to about 340 free-to-air channels that you can access on satellite. Just simply having your satellite in the backyard or on your balcony, you can access about 350 channels for free, and about 150 if you pay a subscription. So the number of channels has exploded tremendously. Now, why? An interesting question that pops up. Why the changes took place between 1990 and 2008. And this is where we start to see a certain pattern that pretty much the way it was happening around the world, the same impact of certain economic or cultural or political phenomena that was taking place throughout the world had their impact on that particular region. 1991, the end of the end of the Cold War. Even though the Arab world itself was not under the effect of the Cold War, it was not. We did not see the same political aspect, changes that took place in Europe, for instance. The case of Germany and the fall of the Berlin Wall. We didn't see any of that, but it took its time to get there. One thing, though, we saw was the first Gulf War. And the first Gulf War, this is when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and stayed there for a couple of months until the U.S. and the international community drove Saddam out of Kuwait. Now, if you were in 1990 in Saudi Arabia, for instance, you wouldn't have known that Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait until 3 days later, because the television station that is government controlled in 1990 did not tell you that this was happening. It took them 3 days until they broke the news to their public. Of course, you could have known through radio or other means, but television, no way. It took time to do that. And one of the things that people were depending on at that time was CNN. And remember that I'm going to be using the term the CNN effect, and I'll come back to that later on, because when governments and private institutions, private entities realized how much popularity CNN had, something clicked in their mind. The technological advances, and I'm not talking here about the difference between a huge satellite and now the ability to get everything on a smaller satellite. I'm talking about everything from the simple means of production that have become easier to access, cheaper, and people can easily grasp them. You don't have to have a huge degree to learn editing. You could easily do that by simply looking up a manual. Of course, you'll get far better if you get an education, but you don't really need that. So technological advances, the fact that they've become smaller and cheaper had its impact on the region. Economic globalization. Now, I have issues with that, but one cannot deny the fact that the world has become extremely, the flow of money going back and forth, the flow of people in terms of migration going from one country to the other is a fact that we have to live with. When I first started working in Italy, I was working for the first pay television dedicated to the Arab world. It was established in Italy, and I was working shoulder to shoulder with lots of Europeans, Americans, Australians, and other Arabs. And we were located in Rome. So that goes to show you to what extent this aspect of interconnectedness and the idea of economic globalization was there. The fourth point is something that's fairly recent. It's a certain awakening within, remember I talked about 30 ethnic minorities, a certain awakening within the region about the idea that we need to be telling our stories. We need to be telling where we're coming from, where we're heading. We need to have a certain voice. The Arab world, those 21 countries that I mentioned, they're governed either by monarchs, kings, or what we refer to as emirs, or they're governed by presidents of so-called republics who've been there forever. And if not them, it's their sons or so on and so forth. So recently this has been going on, and the need for self-expression has triggered this idea of media. I tried to look within theory to try to understand how the positioning of media is going along, because it's really fine to say that there are 360 channels, but where are those channels coming from? How is it being shaped up? This whole atmosphere, that whole media revolution, how did it come about? And I basically restricted myself to three types of theories. One of the interesting ones was something advanced by Castells, where the idea of spatial theories, where what we're experiencing more and more is that society is being networked, the various societies are being networked, and our experiences are not just limited to one particular location, but they're limited to that idea of connectedness between societies. His concept of spaces of flows and space of places, our experiences are not limited to one particular, like in the case here. The experience of Arabs are not anymore limited to the confinements of their borders, their actual state, but they've expanded beyond that because they're getting signals from abroad. They're getting signals from all over the place and are not anymore restricted to that. So that idea of a space is not anymore located within a particular location, but it's there. It's fluid between societies. Others advanced, like McGuire, advanced the idea that urban space has become a hybrid of material and immaterial spaces, and that multiple social realities can occur in one place. Simple example. You're sitting in a coffee shop. You're talking to a person right across. At the same time, you're still able to make a phone call and talk to somebody miles and miles away. And at the same time, you're logged onto your computer and you're having a conference, a video conference with someone who's also in a different, probably in a different time zone at a different time. Our experiences of media are not anymore bound to a particular place, and the way societies, the way the urban, our actual living has become extremely dependent on our ability to connect on different levels, on different, and using what he's referring to as immaterial space. So it's not anymore, we're not anymore confined again to the idea of location. But one of the most interesting books that came out in 1991 was by Saskia Sassen. It's called The Global City, and it's a very interesting read. It deals with how, and it, you know, for anyone interested to understand what's going on right now in the economy, this is a very, very interesting book to look at. Because what her theory is that more and more what we're having is strategic functions for specific cities, and she deals with New York, Tokyo, and London. And she's saying that finance flows, trade flows, and immigration flows are happening from and to these cities. So these cities are no longer stand alone as part of a particular state. So fine, London is part of the UK, but London itself is a standalone entity because of its importance within the globe, within the changing economy. And you know what you've seen, the ripple effect that what happened in New York City gave throughout the world, not just within the U.S., because New York City has become a place where immigrants go from all over the world because of that strategic function that it has as a financial place. And the same thing, businesses, people who wants to trade in, they go and place their money on Wall Street. And the same thing when it comes to finance. So within this realm of theory, and particularly the last one, I try to locate the production centers within the Arab world. So where are those chase stations coming from? And the majority of them happen to be in Beirut, Lebanon, Cairo, Egypt, and Dubai as part of the United Arab Emirates. Now, what I'm going to do now is go over how each of these cities is dealing or has provided for that particular growth. So from a larger picture of a growth within the world of a media revolution, then moving on to the Arab world and saying the kind of revolution that was there. Now I'm going to go and speak specifically to what each of these cities has done in terms of allowing media to flourish and that type of revolution to take place. Lebanon is pretty much, it happens because of history. The country has, for the longest time, had a free press. It's one of the very few sort of democracies there. Every 6 years, the president changes. A different president comes in, not the son of the former president. So you have a history of free press. You have human resources because of a high level of literacy, and specifically when it comes to media, a large number of media schools. An interesting thing happened in 91. Between 75 and 1990, the country has been going through a civil war, political parties fighting each other, militias, and so on. By 1991, what happened, they broke a peace amongst all parties. And instead of, and the joke goes something like this, each militiaman or leader of a party exchanged the tanks and the ammunition that they had for a television antenna and a video camera. By 1991, you had about 55 television channels working in that environment. So when changes were taking place in the Arab world, Beirut was in specific. Beirut was a stage where you can find people working in the media and have had the experience to work in media. Most of the media that's launched from there is a private private entrepreneurs doing that. The government has done nothing in terms of giving economic incentives or anything like that for the media. They just provided a sort of a safe environment where media can actually flourish. Moving on to Cairo, it's a different story right there. There, the country has a long history in terms of film production. And the idea that at some point in the early 1990s, film production was going down, so much competition and so on. So what the government intervened, and they created something called the 6 October Media Free Zone. And basically, it's on the outskirts of Cairo. They took a large piece of land, and what they did, they constructed television and cinema studios, satellite operations. The government paid for this. And they created all this environment and invited people who want to produce and said, okay, we have the employees, we have the cameramans and the editors and the directors. What you need to do is come in, give us the money, and we'll give you the facilities to actually use both the human resources and the people that we have. This was established in 1997, and it's publicly listed. You can actually buy stocks of that company. What they were aiming to do is to make this as a production hub in the region. I will move on to Dubai, and this is the first time in the Arab world where the word a media city came as a standalone, as an all encompassing term, as a term that means all types of media activities, not just production the way it was mentioned in Egypt. And the way this is, by the way, the idea of the mission is taken from their own mission statement. What they focus on is an infrastructure, environment, and attitude. And what they're trying to do is juxtapose internet and new media type of activities with older type of media activities, all in one particular place. It's the model that they're trying to apply is sort of a one-stop shop. The government came in, put in a lot of money in terms of putting the infrastructure for that entity, but does not provide any of the labor force. The government in 2003 gave this facility to a private company in which the government took shares, and that private company manages the building, basically, manages the various buildings that are there, but does not provide any of the labor force. And this is part of an overall approach that Dubai has in terms in trying to establish themselves as a business hub between Asia and Europe. Now, what happened was that by 2008, there's a ripple effect. Now, every single country wants to have its own media city. Even organizations like Hamas, they want to have their own media city because it's turning out to be profitable, maybe. It's turning out to be a place where you can actually control media activities. That would be another explanation. But what is interesting is the fact that we're having that type of a ripple effect there. Now, what I tried to do is try to come up with, based on what we've seen, the whole development from a city like Beirut, where it's a free-flowing, anyone can set up their own shop, and they don't really need to be in one place, to the example of Cairo, where the government has an upper hand in terms of providing infrastructure and labor force, and Dubai, where they're creating an environment and they're letting people come in and actually do what they want to do. I tried to come up with a sort of a pragmatic, a very practical explanation of the concept of a media city. It is an information communication technology hub with the purpose to act as an incubator for economic, sociocultural, and creative capital. Now, what would be the principal drivers for this? How a successful media city can actually take place? You develop high-end infrastructure. You provide types of incentives, co-productions, access, talent, locations, or facilities. And you attract magnet tenants, people that actually are willing to go there and set up shop. Does that sound like something that any of you is familiar with? What happens if, say, I'm a business, I have a lot of money, and I decide to come to Carbondale and say, hey, how about we do this? I want to establish a mall. So how about you giving me tax exemptions? They call them TIF. They create me a TIF district. They give me tax bracket for 10, 20 years. I don't pay anything. I set up this mall. I call up Macy's and say, how about I'll give you a free rent for 3 years, and you come in and set up shop within this mall. It's exactly that idea that we see in businesses taking its place now within the structures of media. Exactly the same thing. And this is, by the way, what ended up happening with Dubai. Dubai started luring companies like Reuters, Associated Press, CNN, a pan-Arab television company, NBC, to come in and set up shop. They gave them lots of incentives. And by doing this, exactly like in the mall situation, because why would a city council give me as a businessman tax exemption? Because they're hoping that I would generate businesses within the community. I would get people to come in and work. It's exactly what happened there. If each company employs anywhere between 100 or 200 or even 600 employees, rent is coming on, people are making money and also spending money right there. It's the same type of economic model that's being applied to media. Some of you would say, okay, how different is it from, say, Hollywood or Hilversum in the Netherlands, where the major bulk of television operation takes place in that particular town, or in Italy? It's not much different. It's just boarding the wave of what's going on in the business and emulating this on media. How unique to the Arab world? It's not so unique. In Finland, they're doing a media city now. The BBC is actually moving to Salford into something that's called Media City UK. It's not unique to the Arab world, and soon enough you will be seeing more and more of this. My friends from Korea were telling me that they're establishing, with the help of MIT, they're establishing a Seoul digital city. Correct me if I'm wrong. Where what's happening there is a similar approach, only restricted to digital activities, where it's not just the development and the research of technological innovations that's taking place within that particular area or that particular city, but also you can go there and experiment with what's going on and buy whatever type of products that you would want from that actual city. Now let me go back to what I thought was interesting about Sassin's work, and why I think employing something so economic-based onto media has lots of questions that especially people like us need to be asking. Sassin identifies 7 characteristics, and what I'm going to do is try to apply them to the way media is being conducted. The first one is the idea of agglomeration economy, whereby in one simple location, you have the logistics, you have the human element, the human resources that are there, and the capital. Everything is being located in one particular place. Now, that will have its impact on the way the country itself, on the way the city itself conducts itself vis-a-vis the rest of the country. If there's this agglomeration economy, you're having all the money being put into one particular place, the human resources are all in one place, and everything is there, that centralization aspect of it. There's also a process, what she identifies as a process of outsourcing. Pretty much, this is what's happening when it comes to media. What Beirut cannot do, Egypt will do. What Egypt cannot do, Dubai will do. They outsource to each other. She noticed a development of a transnational urban system. What she means by that is that people in those particular 3 cities who work in media understand completely each other, and they are completely interconnected with one another. They're constantly in communication with one another. They belong, and this is, pushing her argument a little bit further, they belong to one particular class that speaks the same language, has the same lifestyle. If you look at anyone working in media in those 3 cities, they all virtually dress the same, have their Macs, and they talk pretty much the same jargon, the same type of language, simply because they're constantly talking to one another. And they're not much different from if, say, one of them is working for an advertising company. They're not much different from someone working in Tokyo in an advertising company, because guess what? More likely than not, they are conference calling with them once or twice a week, and in many cases, they're getting together at least once or twice a year for joint brainstorming. So that class of people working in media is also happening. At the same time, that agglomeration economy is creating some type of a disconnect from the other parts of the country. And I would dare to say, at least in the Arab world, what people who are in Cairo are different, not just from people who are in Egypt, but they are different from people who are in most of North Africa, who are not involved in media activities. The city itself is creating, the city itself, by having that strategic function of working in media, has distinct itself from the rest of the country. But also, people working in the media have distinct themselves from other people working in different sectors within the city itself. Just a quick example. We've been hearing about this all throughout the past few weeks. Wall Street versus Main Street. Because people on Wall Street are completely different from people on Main Street. And you don't just see that if you go to New York. People who work on that particular street, they're completely alien compared to people who work on other streets in New York. And this is exactly what's there. There's a growth of informal production and distribution activities. Now, because there is this abundance of work, there's this tendency to outsource it to individuals, to smaller companies, that they would do the job. Now, what's happening is that when you do this, many are tempted to actually go on the freelance market. So the whole labor structure of people working in the media is changing. Increasingly, what we're witnessing is that people are going into the freelance business because they think they can earn more and they can work at their own pace and choose their own projects, as opposed to being part of an organization. This is why countries like Egypt are having difficulty enforcing laws regarding unions. People working in the media in Egypt for the longest time belonged to unions. Now, more and more, they're having difficulty when it comes to that. In Lebanon, they never bothered to have unions. In Dubai, they're not even allowed to have unions. So the labor structure is constantly is taking its toll because of what's happening in that regard. The geographic dispersal. Increasingly, while we're seeing that those cities, those 3 cities, are separated in terms of geographic location, yet at the same time, they're very close to each other in their strategic functions. However, the command, the people who are triggering from a financial aspect, media in all 3 countries, is centralized. And this is where, you know, in trying to investigate this research, this is where I started asking the question, so, okay, who owns the media in this case? Sasson asked the question, whose city is it? Because if the entity who's financing most of the media activity and buying into the media is one, then it might end up owning the whole place. One of the, and it just happened that I was watching a movie that I think everybody should watch, more so now than before. Sidney Lumet's The Network. This is a movie from 1976, and I'm not going to go through the whole story because it would be really interesting for you to watch. But imagine this, and I wanted to show the clip, but it would be too distracting. Imagine Howard Beale, who is an off-the-wall TV anchor, goes on television and says that statement. The company that he's working for, CC&A, is being bought up by the Saudi Arabian Investment Corporation, and they're buying it for the Arabs. This is something that was happening way back in the 70s. So I tried to even go further in this. Some of the research suggests that the Iraqis, Egyptians, Palestinians, and Libyans at various times through history, from the 50s onwards, tried to control the media, whether that it be media within the Arab world, and they primarily focused on media within the Arab world, but also media across, particularly in the West. Douglas Boyd, who's a reference in the field, suggests that Saudi media interests are for vanity, just because, hey, I own a television station; hegemony, because they want to enforce a particular ideology of some sort; or legitimate pursuits of cultural, political, and religious values, because they want media that speaks to them. One may ask the question, why would you want to do that? It's not just an investment for money, but it's also an investment because if you can't control media, you can't control the message. And part of what was taking place is this attempt to, in 1973, when the Saudis were blamed for the oil embargo on the US, they tried to shape the media and say, wait a minute, we're not all that bad. And they tried to have their own stake in saying this. So they needed a platform to actually do that. During the Gulf War, when all the information that their citizens and the rest of the world was getting from was only from CNN, they tried to say, no, wait a minute, we need to be giving our own version of what's going on. Now, that stopped in 2001 because at that point, they sort of gave up on this. The events of 9/11 put Saudi Arabia in such a bad shape in terms of public opinion that they reinvented their whole media policy in terms of investment. And instead of having the investments of oil going into companies abroad, they wanted this whole idea of repatriation of fund. They brought most of their money back from the Swiss banks and from New York and from London and tried to invest it there. One of the areas that easy investment for them was media, because they really needed platforms to speak for their own constituents, to speak for the Saudis within Saudi Arabia, and to speak to other Arabs within the region, so that they can tell them, wait a minute, we probably did something wrong here. We definitely did something wrong here, but we really need to have a say, try to justify themselves, and try to, at the same time, shape up the conversation. Because if you're controlling, if you have a stake in media, you can, to a certain extent, control what's been going on. And I say to a certain extent, because remember, what's been happening is that the media is being, that the people who are actually working, producing the media are not Saudis. They are financing people in Lebanon, in Beirut, in Cairo, and in Dubai to produce media on their behalf. And this is where the challenge comes in. Whenever we're talking about those investments, we need to understand or to remember two things. One, the idea that Saudi investments are official and private, but there's a blurry line between what's official and what's private, because the private sector are members of the royal family who are at the same time the government. So that's one and the same to a certain extent. They are protégés of the royal family. They've had business dealings with them. They are their associates or business partners. So even though the command, even though you may have official and private, but the actual command center of media is still one and the same to a certain extent. Now, of course, within, and this is an oversimplification, they are one and the same, but at the same time, you have different opinions of how they want to shape the message. So that's why there has been this increased competition within these four elements, each one of them trying to set up their own media platform to have their own say in shaping what would be the image of Saudi Arabia. I'm not sure if this is clear. If you want, I can expand on this by taking on these examples. For instance, the idea of pay television is sort of uncensored television getting to Saudi Arabia was the first time when they experienced a lot of Western programs, films, and so on. They did that first through pay television, meaning you need to have a lot of money to actually be able to afford to pay for that type of television. Not everyone in the US, I don't think everyone subscribes to HBO. But later on, once they've discovered that pay television or the kind of programming that's being offered there is safe, they decided to say, okay, we can do this on a free-to-air channel. We can let everybody have access to all types of programming. But programs are not being done within, but they're all done outside. And that brings me to four key observations. In this, I'm trying to link the idea of those three cities producing for that, producing primarily for a major financier, which is in this case Saudi Arabia. These cities have become the center where Saudi political and cultural values are preached, defended, modified, and challenged. There's no absolutes. if you're paying me to produce a television show that you're going to broadcast, you can do whatever. You can not pay me. That's one, if you don't like it. But if you absolutely need, like it is the case here, you absolutely need to produce in one of those 3 cities. So there's a lot of negotiation that goes on in that actual process of coming up with programs. The investments in regional media cities, because up until then, up until 2001, all the money was going to London or Italy, where these programs were produced. Now that the money has come back to those 3 cities, you have a growth of a cultural elite, something that Sassin talks about. The productions are deterritorial and multi-territorial, but with considerations of Saudi market. So they are deterritorial, meaning parts of programs can be produced in one country, other parts produced in another country. But at the same time, they're not, that's multi-territorial, and they are deterritorial. They don't belong to one particular country. They belong to a television channel that goes to all countries. And finally, this idea that needs serious investigation, the idea that the complex relations between television investment and political democracy. To what extent you can have an investment in media that does not encourage political democracy, can actually curb it, or can encourage it. That's a complex relationship there that needs further investigation. With this, I wrap up, and if you have any questions, I'll be glad to take them.